Last evening, I had the pleasure of being at the White House when President Trump introduced his nominee to be Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Judge Neil Gorsuch, who happens to be serving on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And it shouldn't surprise anybody that President Trump delivered on a promise made during the campaign when he listed 21 people that he would choose from. Everybody knew ahead of time what sort of a judge he would put on for this vacancy or any future vacancy. Judge Gorsuch's decade of service on the 10th Circuit has earned him a reputation as a brilliant, principled, and mainstream judge. Just exactly the sort of mainstream that Senator Schumer just must have been thinking about when he said he wants a mainstream judge. It's already been widely reported that he was unanimously confirmed by a voice vote to the 10th Circuit in 2006. There are still 31 senators in this body who voted for the judge at that particular time. 11 of them are Democrats, and one of them is Senator Schumer. Judge Gorsuch was, of course, supported by both of his home state senators for the 10th Circuit. One happened to be a Republican, one a Democrat. He has been recognized as a great jurist by members from both parties. For instance, when he was sworn in to the 10th Circuit, Senator Salazar, then Democrat senator from Colorado, remarked that the judge, quote, has a sense of fairness and impartiality that is a keystone of being a judge, end of quote. The judge happens to be a fourth-generation Coloradoan. He is eminently qualified to be the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. His decades of experience spanned many facets of our legal system. A graduate of Columbia University and Harvard Law School, the judge was also a prestigious Marshall Scholar at Oxford. He served as Principal Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice. Judge Gorsuch also knows the Supreme Court well, having clerked for Supreme Court Justices Byron White and also Anthony Kennedy, who's still on that court. He currently serves with distinction on the 10th Circuit, where he has established himself as mainstream judge with a reputation as a fair and brilliant jurist. As a mainstream jurist, Judge Gorsuch enjoys broad respect across the ideological spectrum. All the confirmation hearings at the current confirmation hearings for his current judgeship on the 10th Circuit, he was introduced by a Republican Senator Allard from Colorado, a Democrat Senator Salazar from Colorado. Senator Salazar, of course, isn't exactly a conservative firebrand, having most recently served as head of the transition team of Secretary Clinton. At his hearing in 2006, William Hughes, Jr., a Democratic candidate for the House of Representatives, authored a strong letter of recommendation for Judge Gorsuch, stating, quote, I have never found nor thought Neil's views or opinions to be tainted or swayed by any partisan leanings. Quite to the contrary. His approach to all things professional and personal has always been moderate and practical. End of quote of Mr. Hughes's letter. And there are plenty of other examples of strong bipartisan support for Judge Gorsuch. Even observers in the press recognize his reputation for fairness. Just last week, the Denver Post endorsed the judge, saying he, quote, has applied the law fairly and consistently, end of quote. Judge John Kane, a colleague on the District Court of Colorado, appointed by President Carter, says that Judge Gorsuch, quote, listens well and decides justly. His dissents are instructive rather than vitriolic. In sum, I think he is an excellent judicial craftsman, end of quote. After his nomination was announced last evening, the highest praise so far came from President Obama's former Solicitor General Neil Katyal, who described the nominee this way, quote, Judge Gorsuch is one of the most thoughtful and brilliant judges to have served our nation over the last century. As a judge, he has always put aside his personal views to serve the rule of law. To boot, as those of us who have worked with him can attest, he is a wonderful, decent, and humane person. I strongly support his nomination for the Supreme Court, end of quote of President Obama's former Solicitor General Neil Katyal. To me, following the law, wherever that law and case may lead, is perhaps the most important attribute for a Supreme Court justice to possess. That principle guided Justice Scalia's decision-making, and it's also how Judge Gorsuch has said judges should approach the law. As the judge once wrote, quoting Justice Scalia, quote, if you're going to be a good and faithful judge, you have to resign yourself to the facts that you're not always going to like the conclusion you reach. If you like them all the time, you're probably doing something wrong, end of quote. That gets back to something very basic. A judge is supposed to be dispassionate. A judge is supposed to leave their personal views out of it. A judge looks at the law on the one hand and the facts of the case on the other and make your decision just based on those two things. So what I have learned so far, the judge's judicial record reflects this philosophy of being dispassionate, following the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress. I think he said last night something like, judge is supposed to judge and a legislature is supposed to legislate, and a judge should not be legislating. Judge Gorsuch doesn't legislate from the bench, nor does he impose his own beliefs on others. I want to quote from a speech at Case Western that the judge said, judges should strive, quote, to apply the law as it is, focusing backwards, not forward, and looking to the text, to the structure, and to history to decide what a reasonable reader at the time of the events in question would have understood the law to be. Not to decide cases based on their own moral convictions or the policy consequences they believe might serve society best, end of quote. I believe it is this fundamental sense of fairness, sense of duty, in upholding the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress that has led the judge to be a highly regarded jurist. After the tragic passing of Justice Scalia, we made it clear that the Senate would wait for the American people to have a say in the future of the court. I said, even before the election, that no matter who won the presidential election, we would move forward with a new president's nominee. I maintained this position even on the eve of the election, and I maintained that position even when everyone seemed to believe that our next president would be Secretary Clinton. I've been consistent. Unfortunately, some of my Democrat colleagues, the very senators who held all those rallies chanting, "We need 9, have already said they intend to do everything they can to stop this eminently qualified judge. That is very, very unfortunate. I hope and trust that approach won't be uniform on their side. So I look forward to moving forward with a hearing when we will learn a great deal more about Judge Gorsuch, and I look forward to an up or down vote on his nomination.